Thank you. And thank you both so much for putting this on for us. This is just, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful room. It's great to have the art sharing spaces. It's terrific. It's terrific. My book is called Field Theory, and people have asked, where did that come from? There's a definition that I found when I read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. I should say when I tried to read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, because most of it went over my head. But he defined field as something that exists throughout space and time, as opposed to a particle that exists at only one point at a time. And that's how living seems to me, especially as I age. The past is just as immediate to me as the future and the present. So that's field theory. So to go along with that, I'm going to start by reading a poem that's titled Tomorrow Before. Another part of aging. Okay. Tomorrow before. A faint trail of our molecules flickers in every place we've ever been. Stroll the alley where your parents courted. Rearrange the doily Aunt Clara tatted. Seek out your old street's potsy playground. The shutter tagged someone stepping on your grave may not be your future, but another's past particle of pain. Walking through life backwards, locked on what was, we stumble over the future as childhood's pokey minute hand whirligigs the grown-up years away. Harvest the molecules, plug in the old toaster, inhale the ions, play a taped radio show. It's make-believe ballroom time. Savor the scalloped potatoes from Mom's polka dot chafing dish. Let the past snap back through wavering time. I grew up in Upper Manhattan, and although we've lived in Westchester now for 20-something years, there's a piece of me that's just always going to be a New York City person. Full disclosure, Ann and I went to the same high school, though she's 2 years behind me, but anyway. So this next poem that I'm going to read, New York City Pastoral, is not a traditional pastoral, which of course refers to, love of nature and the clouds and all those buggy things and what have you. This is a New York City pastoral. I've lived these middle years in a place with trees, time enough for greenery to take root in my dreams. But my reverie's still lit by the bright white smiles of billboard queens, by smoke rings puffed high above Times Square, or the flamingo pink skin of a Spalding ball as it arcs from the pebbly nub of concrete past the iron-rimmed curve to the trash-gummed gutter. Sure, I know the easy flower of dogwood, leaf of maple, but hemlock, fir, or pine are just evergreens, as every bird's call and color blurs, despite my bird book guide. Perfect earthbound bouquets flourish in neighbors' yards. All I have are strays, dropped by wind or creature, to bed in dirt, warm dirt, piled deep for growth, not the grime that blackens city windowsills. I was taught that what you put in dirt will not come up clean. The hold for me is spring's hard bounce of rain on ash can lids. Summer, asphalt hot to the step. Fall's frantic dance of soot-filled swirls. Every snow, a thin, clean skin to cover stain. And because we're in a gallery, I'm going to read the poem that Anne mentioned, Far from a Roman Spring. I find this time of year when the light goes down to be really hard to get through. I sort of hold on until winter solstice and the days get longer again. And this poem is after Bernini's sculpture of Pluto and Persephone in the Villa Borghese in Rome. Far from a Roman spring. And now that I've stopped, I'll just tell why I stopped. It's a terza rima, so you'll hear the rhyme going back and forth. I was having a small attack of Dante at the time, I guess. So, far from a Roman spring. Winter seeping through a gray Boston sky, trees close to cresting their fling of color. their leaves a fragile talisman to belie another autumn's headlong tumble for the piercing void shadow and ice confect. Last spring in Rome, we saw how a sculptor carved this descent. Persephone's perfect marble tear, with Pluto's fingers denting her flawless stone-soft flesh. Felt her abject fear. She knows there's no hope of escaping his grip, his eternally triumphant leer. He finds her struggle exhilarating. She can't know that her mother will soon steer seasons of fruitfulness to empty bud, coercing the gods to draw her daughter clear, if only for months of growth to warm her blood. No matter, Pluto will always pull her back. Every year she'll wait for the dull thud as Hades' gates shut. Someday she'll tire of the journey, coming up into light, knowing descent's inevitable gyre. For now, let's leave her vital in her fright, without the torment of second sight. So part of growing up where I did in New York, it was a very Irish neighborhood. My grandmother was from Ireland. She came at the turn of the century in 1909, before Ireland was free. They didn't talk much about the famine, but it was always there. You know, it was always background, and it was a terrible sense of shame that the Irish took upon themselves, that somehow it was their fault. They'd lost so much. So this is once numinous landscape. On the boundaries between villages, unbaptized children were laid in the ground, their limbo on earth as they will not have heaven. Overgrown rubble from famine roads, heaped stones amidst brambles, mark graves, residue of workforce ruin. Celtic courtiers forced from their homes, houses dissolved to the mud they came from, turf and furze covered ditches as shelter, shadows of keening, scourge of God, famine fevers in the bloody flux, once bountiful fields abandoned, unplowed. Don't let us die of the hunger, not a weed, not a nettle left to harvest. I'll try to get just a little less depressing momentarily. This next poem also speaks back to the hunger, but it speaks of different kinds of hungers, personal hunger, and of course it relates back to the famine too. I have to always say that when I read this poem where it says my husband, that means my ex-husband, not my husband, okay? So when you hear this, this is definitely not Brad. No, not my tech guy. The hunger. Newlywed and new to the kitchen, I made potatoes every night. Mashed, boiled, skin on or off, fried or roasted, no potato lurked in my cupboard. I scrubbed wherever dirt might lurk. I'd learned how potato clumps in their lazy beds blackened, starving a million, sending the lucky to famine ships, hatches battened between decks of the dying. My husband loved to mock the Irish of me, the 7-course dinner of 6-pack and a potato. He'd pretend to pomme de terre dauphine, but lived for instant, quick-cooked flakes. He tried out new beds and pronounced mine cold. I burned rice, made glutinous noodles. In the bad years, landlords exported food, while tenants starved. The righteous blamed the starving for the blight. Some say we're a feckless race. Some confuse person with potato. That's part of one of the things you can do when you write. Maybe if you couldn't get mad at the time, get even later, right? So you can imagine, given that kind of ethnic background, that my family was not fond of the English. So Brad and I, when we would travel for work or whatever, we had never been to England because in my ignorance it was like, what would be there to do in England? So we finally went, And I just loved it. I loved London. Still love London. We've been back a lot of times, but I had to go through some talking to myself from my grandmother, essentially, when we were there. So this is Irish in the British Museum. I thought I had snuck into England, but as I stood by poems from Keats' living hand, Nana's brogue found me. If it isn't herself in the fancy place where they flaunt their spoils, they don't want the likes of you. Though I know how they glossed their crimes, the proper manners and careful grooming, I dare admit I like being on this enemy ground. She'd not see it. The black and tans will get you. Can't scare me with those boogeyman killers when her IRA and the prods play truce or bomb like a crazed child's game of tag. Once, their harum-scarum strife seemed right to me, mind closed and fists ready, fight or flight. How can I, in this public place of luster, show her I've changed the hallmarks of my life? Without waking the voice I heard the most. Her fate willing, don't be getting above yourself.
Wow, nice.
So we try. The brogue. I didn't know when I was a kid that people spoke with brogues. That was just the way people spoke. The next poem that I'm going to read is a pantoum, and you all know about that repeating form. That it's because it's about thoughts that keep repeating. The title of the poem is Between Now and Never, and that goes back to what Anne was talking about that she found in this book, which was wonderful. You know, what's going to happen at some point? Who's going to do the words? Where are we going to go? Well, it doesn't ask where we're going to go. I don't have a clue, but it's just looking at least what's going to happen maybe between now and never. Come morning, a silver skim calms the river. She wakes enthralled to wandering sorrow. In the shrinking space between now and never, who will ferry the words away for tomorrow? She wakes enthralled to wandering sorrow, all the time in her world sealed up inside. Who will ferry the words away for tomorrow? The silence, the dazzle, the blind, there beside all the time in her world sealed up inside. As current pulls while the swelling tide turns, the silence, the dazzle, the blind, there beside time in shadow or scrim, so silence returns as current pulls while the swelling tide turns in the shrinking space between now and never. Time in shadow or scrim, so silence returns. Come, morning, a silver skim calms the river. The other side of my mother's background, my mother was half Irish and her father was half Native American and half French Canadian. And at the time that I was growing up, people did not talk about the fact that they were Native American. There was just such, it was another part of shame. I realized when I went through this book, when I was proofreading it, that I used that word 4 times in this book. But it's something, shame, the word shame. It was something that we were raised with. You didn't talk about things because it was as if anything bad that happened to you clearly hadn't happened to anyone else in the world, you know? This first poem about that part of my family is called Looking for Degrees of Consanguinity. My mother's brutal father, pock-scarred, notched nose, sitting bull profile, a fast fist wielder, New York City occasional cabbie, house painter, born in Flint, Michigan, his heritage vanquished by his Anglo-featured older brother's ascent to big bucks made on parking meters in Erie, PA. Uncle Ben, exalted master poobah Freemason, all white men there, no engines need apply, drove north once a year from retirement in his new caddy, treated us to dinner, have a steak, like we never ate meat all year. He had no kids, I was cautioned, be nice. while my mother reverted to the fright-filled child they'd locked away for wanting to be a nun, as if her Irish Catholic mother weren't taint enough, a nun. To file a CDIB, Certificate of Degree of Indian Blood, you must know where to find your tribe, prove one parent's entitlement to membership. The next poem that I'm going to read is called Many Voices, Wife of the Brave. And I read this, Golda, when we did the Poe Jazz. We had this wonderful experience at Cornelia Street with a jazz trio behind us. So, I can't remember either. There was it was a woman playing the bass. They were terrific, and I've got it written down someplace. But so I don't have music, but you know, if anybody wants to pretend they're a jazz trio, feel free to back me up. It's called Many Voices, Wife of the Brave. They say woman should not talk before man. Let us raise the song, remember story. Here is the place where the women dance, hiya, hiya. Move your butt and give us a chance, hoka, hey. First woman was the center of the earth. She who planted corn, made first fire, knew mint, chokecherry, and buffalo's worth. They claim woman's blood has too much power, that her time of month makes all things magic cower. And his heart was going like mad, and yes, I said, yes, I will, yes. We sang our braves to fight against the days of the white man's claim for land and sky, sang to greet scalp, and our men learned their ways. You want some lovin' by the chokecherry tree? Hiya, hiya. Better find the line and follow me, hoka, hey. First woman's blood became first man. Praise her now, her song, her story, hoka, hey. This book is dedicated to both my mother-in-law and my tech guy. And I want to read a poem to Brad to close with. It's called Elliptical Time. Elliptical time. Stars surrounding the roofline startle. Startle as in started, as to kick, to struggle. With their now you see them, now you don't. Almost barren oak trees branch exclamation points of leaves. Jagged wing overhead, ragged caw sounding. Tree limbs screech, night noise magnificat. Old ice sinking, puckering the river's surface. Arctic blue is mostly green and sludgy. I remember seeing all of these. I have notes. But today, waking somewhere, terrified to know neither my here nor my home. A gaping blank, no notes to bring up the habitual now of my tapering life. Rough sleepers, out of home, the homeless, names for those with no roof to call their own. What to call those who can't summon up home? Home. Some mornings, long sleep and curtain-filtered light have eased the lines of time round your eyes. Easy then to think the same of mine, forgetting the years. The passage of time in the eye of the beholder, in the blink of an eye, hold on tight. The fabric of time is thinning. It's gonna be one hell of a ride.